Hi guys, Olive here today to bring you my October 2017 reading wrap-up. I read a lot of great books this month and I've been so eagerly anticipating sharing my thoughts and feelings on these books with you, so let's get started. The first book I finished in October was Vulture, The Private Life of an Unloved Bird by Katie Fallon. As I have mentioned previously, I have really become a bird nerd over the past year or so, ever since reading and falling in love with Ages for Hawk by Helen Macdonald. I saw this book and thought that it would be similar, a narrative style piece of nonfiction, but of course about vultures instead of a hawk. A vulture is a type of bird that most of us have probably heard of before, but it does not have the best reputation, to say the least. This is probably because most of their diet consists of what is called carrion, meaning dead things. As such, in our minds, vultures are very strongly associated with death and decaying and other unpleasantness. But a fact that is right in front of our faces about vultures that Fallon so aptly notes in this book is that vultures don't actually kill anything. They eat things that are already dead. And by doing so, they provide an essential service to our ecosystem, keeping diseases that would otherwise be spread into our world from decaying organisms simply by, well, eating them. She describes these birds for what they actually are, which are remarkable, surprisingly elegant creatures that are perfectly adapted for their diets. For example, the turkey vulture, which is Katie Fallon's favorite type of vulture, has a featherless head to prevent any bacteria from the food that they eat to become lodged in any feathers around their face, which prevents infection. Their sense of smell is so fine-tuned that they can smell dead things from miles above, even if it's under brush cover, and their stomachs are so acidic that it effectively neutralizes any bacteria that could potentially make them ill. In this book, the author outlines not just the role that vultures play in our environment, but also their cultural significance throughout human history, and also the dangers that they face, unsurprisingly, mainly from humans. Fallon did her job so well in this book that I now consider myself a fan of the vulture, particularly the turkey vulture. And when I went to visit the National Aviary here in Pittsburgh for my birthday at the end of the month, I picked up this vulture stuffed animal. His name is Rupert, and he's a part of the family now. The second book that I finished in October was my pick for Victober, which was Miss Mckenzie by Anthony Trollope. I did want to pick up a Victorian novel for Victober, and I've been hearing so many good things about Anthony Trollope. I was very interested in giving him a try, but I did not want to pick up the first book in a 500-book series, so I did a little bit of research on his standalone novels and found a recommendation for this book as a good place to start with Anthony Trollope. So I decided to take that recommendation. This book tells the tale of Margaret Mckenzie, a mid-30s unmarried woman who has spent most of her life playing nurse to various ailing family members. When her brother, the latest person she had been nursing, dies from his ailments, he leaves Margaret his entire fortune, which the rest of the family is none too pleased about. Finally free to be her own woman and make her own choices, Margaret flees London in pursuit of small town life. She moves to a small town and becomes involved with a group of people who hover like satellites around this one particular pastor and his cult of personality. Becoming involved with this group certainly provides her with new social connections as well as lots of drama. Additionally, 3 suitors come out of the woodwork once it becomes known that Margaret is an heiress. Obviously, they're all after her money, but their true colors start to come out as Margaret faces hardships as the book goes on. Overall, I liked this book. It wasn't anything that really blew me away, particularly because of the treatment of Margaret's character. She is consistently called a pushover by just about every other character in this book, but her behavior continues to show otherwise. On many different occasions in this book, you see Margaret stand up for herself, but she's not selfish. She's kind and she cares for others. Does that kind of selflessness warrant a pushover label? I don't think so. The next book I finished in October was Tuesday Nights in 1980 by Molly Prentice. This was a spontaneous pick on audiobook that absolutely blew me away. This book takes place over a calendar year from New Year's Eve 1979 through the year 1980 in New York City. We center in on 3 different characters in this novel. There is a passionate, very talented artist who is originally from Argentina. We also focus on a middle-aged art critic who is blessed/cursed with synesthesia. And we also follow a small town girl in her early 20s, originally from the Midwest, who has moved to New York City to start her life anew. The plot of this novel is about how these three characters' lives intertwine. But the real strength of this novel comes from the descriptions of how these characters connect to one another. The writing of this book was absolutely electric. The descriptions of the art critic's synesthesia, which is the ability to see, taste, smell things that aren't really there. So for example, when this art critic sees his wife, he quite literally sees the color red and tastes strawberries. His experiences of synesthesia were so remarkably encapsulated in her descriptions that I was getting those tingly ASMR feelings in my head. The physical way that I reacted when I was listening to this audiobook really made me wonder whether or not I experienced mild synesthesia, which would go a long way in describing why my memory is so freakishly good. I feel a bit biased in my glowing recommendation of this book because I connected with it in such a weirdly specific way, but I honestly do think it's fantastic even if you don't have that experience with it. If it helps you at all in deciding whether or not you would like to read this book, I did go on Goodreads after I finished it, and the blurb of this book says that readers of The Interestings and A Visit from the Goon Squad would enjoy this book, and I highly agree. The fourth book I finished in October was The Kitchen Boy, a novel of the last Tsar by Robert Alexander. I read this small historical fiction book during Dewey's 24-hour readathon, and I talked all about my thoughts and feelings about this book in my chatty wrap-up video, which I will link down below for you if you would like to hear my thoughts on this. The next book that I finished in October was City Folk and Country Folk by Sofia Kvostinskaya, translated by Nora Seligman-Favorov. This was my random pick off of my TBR for the month. This is a piece of Russian literature that was written in the 19th century but was only recently translated into English. This book takes place 1 year after the emancipation of the serfs in Russia and serves as a satire for that time period. To me, it seemed like the main character, Nastasia Ivanovna, characterized the whole of Russia at this time. And it really seemed like the main character's 17-year-old daughter, Olenka, served as Kvostinskaya's way to insert herself into the story and be able to roll her eyes at the conflicting sides, the overly religious and the upper-class snob. Both of these sides are portrayed to be absolutely absurd in this novel, but for whatever reason still manage to pull our main character in either direction. Meanwhile, her daughter, Olenka, is common sense personified. I had a so-so reaction to this book. I thought it was brilliantly translated, which makes it remarkably readable, but for whatever reason, even with the deep love for Russia that I have, I can't get into Russian literature. I'm certainly not ready to give up trying Russian literature and trying to find a piece of Russian literature that really clicks with me, but I can't ignore this feeling if it keeps happening. The universe must have been smiling on me this month because I finished not one, but 2 5-star books this month. 5-star reads for me this year have been about as elusive as unicorns, so you can imagine my shock reading 2 in 1 month. My first 5-star read was Tuesday Nights in 1980, and my second was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This is a campus novel, reminiscent of The Secret History, but revolving around acting students who focus solely and completely on Shakespeare. We follow a group of 4th-year students at a very prestigious acting school who are as close as siblings and are at the height of their studies, taking on more demanding, more complex roles. Each of them has a type that they are typically typecasted into, and often in their real lives, they have trouble divorcing themselves from the roles they are consistently playing. If you are familiar with The Secret History, you have probably already guessed that a death at the school shakes up things within their group. It seems to me that any book I read that bears any kind of similarity to The Secret History ends up with grumpy reviews on Goodreads from lovers of Donna Tartt. Unfortunately, this book is no exception to that rule. It seems like people go into Secret History-esque books expecting the same novel, and then they're either disappointed when it's not the exact same book, or irritated when a book shows too many similarities. Often both emotions at one time. So, my dear friends, this book is not The Secret History. It's better. People who love The Secret History tend to heap praise on Donna Tartt's gorgeous writing, and while this book's writing is not as flowery as The Secret History, it is still brilliant, and this book is perfectly paced. To me, the characters in this book felt more like real people. It was pretentious, but on an enjoyable level versus an obnoxious one. And I just couldn't get enough of this book. This book managed to make me fall head over heels in love with the way Shakespeare uses words, and now I need to get around to reading Shakespeare. If you want something tense, intelligent, and moody for these cool fall days, you absolutely must get your hands on this book. The next to last book I finished in October was The Genius of Birds by Jennifer Ackerman. As I mentioned at the beginning of this wrap-up, I have been absolutely obsessed with birds lately, so I was really looking forward to picking this one up. This is a nonfiction work all about the intelligence of birds, how their brains work, how they communicate, how much of their behavior is based on instinct, how they are so adept at navigating, and so on and so forth. Scientists have only recently started to discover just how intelligent birds are, and this book is dominated by the results of a plethora of different scientific studies that seek to answer questions about bird behavior and bird intelligence. I found this book absolutely fascinating and very well written. But I had to bump it down from a 5-star rating to a 4-star rating because some of the experiments in this book absolutely turned my stomach. For example, scientists have been very eager to find out just how birds can find their way back home so effectively. And so in at least one study that this book discusses, the scientists take a group of birds and snip a nerve that they believe has some sort of purpose in navigation. They then release these birds back out into the wild to see if they were able to find their way back home. But the only way to find out whether or not that nerve was important was if those birds were never able to find their way back home again. The nerve that they cut in these birds must have been crucial for something because these birds were never seen again. So congratulations, I guess. You've just crippled an innocent animal to prove a point. That definitely upset me, but as the sweeping majority of cases that are discussed in this book are not cruel in the least bit and are more about observations about bird behavior, I will say that overall I did enjoy this book. And the very last book I read during October was Daughters of the Witching Hill by Mary Surratt. I originally wanted to pick this book up during October because witches, Halloween, you see the connection. This is a historical fiction novel set before and during the Pendle witch trials of 1612. Mary Surratt really did her research for this novel and took the true account of a 3-generation family that was affected by the witch hunt and spun her own story with it, one in which these women were actually witches, some good, some evil. She makes these characters, who were actual people affected by this event, feel so real. And she weaves in other people who were in this area at the time and other events that happened during the witch trials so effortlessly. It's just really great historical fiction. I immensely enjoyed this, so if you're looking for something witchy a la The Crucible this time of year, since this time of year always personally reminds me of The Crucible, I would recommend this. But of course, I'm not actively trying to get you to read anything but nonfiction during Nonfiction November. So those were all of the books that I finished during October. This video does not have a TBR component because I have already shared what I will be reading during Nonfiction November in a separate TBR video. I will link that down in the description box below in case you missed it. I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books, if you've heard about any of these books, if you're now interested in reading any of these books now that you've heard me talk about them. You can put that or anything else you'd like to chat with me about down in the comment section below, or you can find me on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles are in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.